The company that builds America's aircraft carriers is worth less than the company that makes their reactors. My call is that Huntington Ingalls finishes 2026 with a consolidated operating margin below 7% at 65% odds. Last year, 5.3. The year before, 4.6. By its own description, it's the only company currently capable of building, refueling, and inactivating a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. A monopoly on the most strategically important manufacturing in the country, earning about 5 cents on the dollar. Margin falls the closer you get to the hull. Irreplaceable isn't the same as having pricing power. With exactly one customer and a shipyard full of people welding steel, irreplaceable just means you're the one who has to deliver. The market has worked this out. It pays up for the layers above the hull and marks down the yard. So here's my disagreement, and it cuts against the obvious trade. Huntington Ingalls is 35% below its 52-week high, while sitting on a record $57.3 billion backlog. And that combination normally reads as a setup. I don't think it is 1. 5.3%, 4.6, 6.8. 3 years of consolidated margin that never once touched 8. Through a stretch when orders were never the problem. A backlog only turns into earnings at the margin you're allowed to charge on it. Huntington Ingalls runs Newport News in Virginia and Ingalls in Mississippi. General Dynamics runs Electric Boat, Bath Iron Works, and NASCO inside a segment called Marine Systems. They split the submarine work. HI is the sole builder of amphibious assault ships, one of 2 builders of surface combatants, and the only company able to build, refuel, and inactivate nuclear carriers. General Dynamics is worth $104 billion. Huntington Ingalls, 11.8. $12.48 billion of revenue last year, $657 million of operating income. A 5.3% margin against 4.6 in 2024 and 6.8 in 2023. Substantially all of that revenue comes from the U.S. government, from a workforce of about 44,000 building things nobody else on Earth can build. 5.3%. Ingalls, which builds surface ships and amphibs, did $3.08 billion at a 7.6% segment margin. Mission Technologies, the services arm, $3.04 billion at 5%. Then Newport News, $6.5 billion of revenue, $331 million of segment operating income, 5.1%. In 2024, it was 4.1. Newport News is where the aircraft carriers get built and where half the Virginia-class submarine work happens. The single most irreplaceable industrial site in American defense runs a 5% margin. If you want the margin ladder instead of the headline budget number, subscribe. The next teardown climbs 1 layer into the reactor components. GD reports its shipbuilding separately. Marine Systems did $16.7 billion last year at a 7% operating margin, up from 6.5, guided to about 7.3 this year. 7% beats 5, but nobody in industrial manufacturing would call it good. Now put GD's other defense segment beside it. Combat Systems, which builds wheeled and tracked vehicles and munitions, did $9.2 billion at 14.4%. Same company, same customer. 55% of the revenue, double the margin. GD's nuclear-powered submarine revenue alone was $12.6 billion last year. Huntington Ingalls, the entire company, did 12.48. GD sells more submarines than HI sells everything. And that line grew from $8.6 billion in 2023, so it added about $4 billion of submarine revenue in 2 years. The difference is what sits around it. Marine Systems is 32% of General Dynamics. The other 68%, Gulfstream jets, combat vehicles, technologies, carries the average to 10.2%. Huntington Ingalls has no other 68%. General Dynamics trades 4% below its 52-week high. Huntington Ingalls is 35% below. HI's backlog at the end of June was $57.3 billion, up from $53.1 at year-end. General Dynamics finished last year at $118 billion, which it described as an increase of 30% from 2024. Inside that, $20.1 billion of combined U.S. Navy awards for the Virginia-class and Columbia-class programs in a single year. Nobody here is short of orders. They're short of margin on the orders they already have. In 2025, Huntington Ingalls hired approximately 8,000 new employees against a workforce of about 44,000. Roughly 18% of the company in 12 months. The filing gives no turnover rate, so I won't invent one. But hiring at that pace costs money either way before it produces a ship. 45% of that workforce sits under 13 separate collective bargaining agreements. About 3,800 came through the company's own apprentice school, and roughly 1,350 have more than 40 years of continuous service. You can't buy a nuclear pipe welder. You make one on somebody's payroll for years. Stack the chain by margin, and it runs one direction. BWX Technologies, which makes the naval reactor components, ran 17.6% in its government segment last quarter. GD's Combat Systems, 14.4%. General Dynamics overall, 10.2%. Then the yards. Ingalls, 7.6%. GD's Marine Systems, 7.0%. Huntington Ingalls overall, 5.3%. Newport News, 5.1%. Same programs, same customer, same national priority. The further you go toward cutting and welding the steel, the less of the money stays with you. And here's the comparison I've never seen anyone actually make, because it takes two different companies' segment tables to build. BWX Technologies earns 17.6% on the reactor components. Newport News earns 5.1% on the ship those components go into. That's 3.5 times the margin on the same hull for the same customer out of the same appropriation. Nobody publishes that ratio. You have to compute it. 3 reasons, and a bigger defense budget fixes none of them. A shipyard ties up billions of dollars in assets with exactly one use, because a dry dock size for an aircraft carrier builds aircraft carriers and nothing else. The work is labor, in volume, over years, and wages rise on their own schedule rather than the contracts. And there's one buyer, so price is negotiated rather than discovered. Being the only supplier gets you the contract. It doesn't get you the terms, because the buyer knows you have nowhere else to sell a carrier. Components escape all 3. A reactor part or a munition has alternative buyers, shorter cycles, and specifications you can price against. RTX at $283 billion, Lockheed at $130, General Dynamics at $104, Northrop at $78. Huntington Ingalls is the smallest name here at $11.8 billion, below BWX Technologies at $14.4, the company that supplies the reactor components for the ship's HI builds. The supplier is worth more than the shipyard. That's this episode's argument, expressed as a market cap. Naval industrial base is a genuine national priority and a structurally poor business at the same time, and those two facts aren't in tension. Irreplaceability, without an alternative buyer, is leverage the seller can't use. The thesis lives in the layers above the hull rather than the yards. Reactor components, propulsion, vehicles, and munitions earn 2 to 3 times what the shipyards earn on the same programs and the same budget. Now, the risk I don't think isn't a price anywhere, and it isn't at Huntington Ingalls. That one is already 35% off its high. It's at General Dynamics for percent off its. The mechanism is just how little cushion a 5 to 7% margin gives you. Marine Systems did $16.7 billion of revenue last year and earned about $1.17 billion on it. A cost re-estimate of 5% on that revenue is $835 million, which is 70% of everything the segment earned all year. The same 5% at Combat Systems, at 14.4% margins, takes about a third. Thin margins don't fail gradually. They fail all at once, and the yards are the thin ones. Here's the level. General Dynamics guided Marine Systems to roughly 7.3% this year, coming under 7 with hiring and wages running the way they are, and that's the leverage showing up. The counterweight is specific and worth naming. Shipbuilding contracts get renegotiated, and a more generous contract type would show up as margin with no change in the work. If Newport News starts printing 7%, the ships got repriced, and I'm wrong. Through 2027, most likely at 65%, both backlogs keep growing while shipyard margins stay in the 5 to 8% band. Revenue growth without margin expansion, which is what the last 3 years already looked like. The call stands. HI's consolidated operating margin below 7% for 2026 at 65% odds, settled in the February annual report. Second order and narrower. Newport News segment margin below 6% for 2026 at 60% odds, because that's the specific yard that has to improve for any of this to change. 3. Break thresholds. Newport News margin, 5.1%. Above 7 and the ships got repriced. GD's Marine Systems against its own 7.3% guide, because GD manages the same problem with better tools. And HI's hiring 8,000 last year because a yard that stops hiring at that rate has either fixed its labor problem or stopped growing. Catalysts up, a contract restructuring that shifts risk back to the customer, or a submarine award large enough to change the mix. Down, another year of wage growth outrunning the contract, or a schedule problem that turns into a charge. Upstream, this pulls naval reactor components, specialty steel, and forgings. Downstream, it's the fleet, and there's no substitute customer anywhere on Earth. What changes my mind? Newport News clearing 7%, or HI's consolidated margin above 7.5. I'm Big Z. Follow me. See you in the next deep dive.